Jeff, Zach, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us, Steve.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, interesting topic today. Distress in mezzanine debt. This is debt that is put on usually on top of deals, sometimes layered. It's additional. It's oftentimes, maybe from private equity or private financial sources. So we're not talking about the typical type of real estate debt. um, kind of a lot of times associated with higher risk property loans. And the Wall Street Journal recently did an analysis where they found 62 of these types of loans having trouble, which is actually kind of a record. 62 doesn't sound like a high number, but it is a record for the amount of these types of mezzanine loans that are in trouble. It seems to be mostly around some of those office buildings and those tech hubs we've talked about, as well as also some multifamily buildings where there were pretty aggressive structures, putting on adjustable debt, maybe having some very aggressive assumptions about being able to do value add and increase rents that have kind of come into trouble. So Journal was making a lot out of this, but I wanted to get your guys's. Thought it would be good to get your guys' thoughts on how big of a deal is this distress in mezzanine debt we're seeing.
Well,
Look, I think.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
After you.
Look, I think there's a lot that goes into it. Mezzanine is probably a much larger picture of the structured financing most people actually consider. But realistically, in my mind, I think there's a lot of deals that go bad primarily because people needed to get specific returns on investments to make deals work. They needed higher leverage, and they use mezzanine structures. And now where you've got increasing interest rate environment and you've got these mezzanine structures on there, it's harder for them to get refinanced.
Well, I was going to take a step back at square one and shed a little education. So a mezzanine loan, if for the average person who's not in structured finance, would be the equivalent of having a mortgage and then getting a home equity line of credit. And your first position on your house might be great, and your second position, it takes you up higher and higher in that leverage, and you pay them separately. And you can default on the home equity line without defaulting on your mortgage, and they'll still take your house. So that's kind of what is happening here is people took out second mortgages on these properties. And to Jeff's point, usually people do that when they can't get enough leverage to buy a property. Now, most times that's because the first position is too low. And we're seeing that today, and we're seeing mezz loans surge at this point. Leverage is in the 50 to 60% range, with most of it on average about 55%. That's incredibly low from first position lenders. So mezzanine loans today are taking you up to about 70%, and in some cases where they push at 75%, which is still a safe level of debt. A lot of these guys, and especially 08, 09, they were using mezzanine loans to get to 85, 90%, and they were leaving no equity in the deal. And that's where you start getting into real trouble, because those mezzanine loans, to Jeff's point, they might have been 5, 6, 7% when they were originated 10 years ago. They come due 10 years later. Interest rates today are 8, 10, 12%. All of a sudden, you're equity underwater.
And to clarify, just for people who don't know, mezzanine is generally structured as the ownership interest in the LLC that owns the entity. And the other reason why a lot of times why you don't see them traditionally in foreclosure acts is because most of them are non-judicial, so they don't have to go through a court proceeding to get it done. And the other problem is most lenders that do it end up just taking over the debt, and use it as their own, the existing debt, because those existing liabilities stay with the real estate, with the entity that owns the real estate that they're taking over.
So my position here, I think it's awful. I think you're probably going to see more of it. And I think that we're in the middle of a cycle where that's what we're doing at this point, based on Fed pushing rates too high. With too little leverage for people to transact, I think you're going to see a lot more of this being originated today and moving forward.
And so I kind of want to step back here. I mean, just reading the Journal headline that popped out, it almost seems like, this is a huge issue. It's a huge worry for the entire sector. And then I think as we talk about and dig a little deeper, it really sounds like when we're talking about mezzanine debt and debt issues, we're talking largely about properties that got very, very aggressively leveraged, and they had, as you said, Zach, kind of the equivalent of what they already had a loan, and then they took out a home equity loan. Well, in some of these cases, they took out maybe four, five, six, seven home equity loans on top
That's
of the
true.
original loan. So I think, and then on top of that, we're not talking about, the whole market that's having problems. It really seems to be, again, office and some tech hubs in places like San Francisco or whatnot, and then some multifamily deals where the operators were just extremely aggressive in terms of how much debt and how much leverage that they put on. Would you guys kind of agree that that's really what we're talking about? Not the entire sector, or not something that's blowing up everywhere, but really kind of a niche here.
It's absolutely a niche. In my mind, I would add to it, we're kind of hinting towards an 85-90% leverage. And the reality is a mezz lender in today's world isn't going for that because they know they can't get out of it. They don't want to put that much equity into a property that may not be worth that much as well. So, they're chasing after, they're chasing after borrowers that are looking to meet specific returns. And in the event that they default, they take over property for much cheaper than they would have had to buy it for.
I
Yeah. Do you?
disagree.
Mhm.
I completely disagree.
For
Um,
you.
there's a lot more of that out there than this is being reported. A lot of it is being kept quiet. You'll never see it. They'll do workouts, they'll do workarounds, they'll do structured refinances and takedowns. There's a lot of other technical things that they can do to prevent this from happening, but it is rampant, and it's not just risky operators, and it's not just one asset class. And you're seeing it, like I said, we've been approached. The mezz sector is very hot right now. There's a lot of other names for it too. I mean, there's pref equity, there's private equity, there's all sorts of other vehicles, but it's all the same positioning. And they're not shying away from it the way that I think Jeff is indicating. I think they're actually going more for it because those lenders are always the most opportunistic. They are the ones that want to take properties and they want to own it because they will own it 20 cents on the dollar cheaper than what they'd otherwise have to pay for it. I think this gets a lot worse, and I think that you're going to see more headlines like this, and you know maybe there's stuff that gets swept under the rug, but I think that this is only the beginning.
Yeah,
And
and just
maybe
a
I should
quick.
clarify is
Uh,
because what I meant is I have clients that have, where I have provided some, mezz structures for recently. And to be perfectly honest with you, mezz lenders, they're still requiring 20-25% down. So they're getting in there if they quote unquote foreclose on those interests, they're getting in there with 10% equity down, have a loan in place and ready to go. They don't have to do anything. It's a cheaper way for them to get them in. I'm not saying that it is one specific group that's just trying to, it's a quote unquote crappy borrower or a distressed borrower. I just meant there's a lot of opportunity in mezzanine that I think is not necessarily being presented in that article.
Well, here's another example for you too, is mezz lenders that are disguising themselves as private lenders or as bridge lenders. And I'll give you 65% or 70% leverage. I'll give you 100% of your construction dollars.
That's right.
And I might do it as two separate loans. I might do it as all one loan, but your leverage is getting back to 80, 85%. And people might have a great plan with a great property in the absolutely right area. And all of a sudden, they're getting screwed out. They can't refinance it, and the leverage is too high, and the lender knew it. And it's not predatory. So I mean, we're seeing that all over the place. We won't take it. We look at better structures, we look at safer deals. We want to make sure we don't over lever because our biggest thing is we want to keep the property. But it is out there, and a lot of people are getting their hands, even good operators, getting their hands caught in the cookie jar.
yeah, and I think another thing we didn't fully cover is just the way these are structured. Is you take that loan on the property initially. The mezz debt isn't on the property; it's on the person who owns the property. So if you can't pay it, you basically hand the property over, and the property's still intact. It's still financed and whatnot. And that's one of the things these operators are looking at. If they really like the property, them not getting their loan paid back can be a good thing. because the
That's it.
property goes directly to them, and it's a very clean process. It stays out of the courts and whatnot. It doesn't have, so it's not really technically a foreclosure.
That's
But
right.
they end up with the property. So that's what's going on here. And you got to be, you know, some of these mez operators are pretty sharp. If there's a property they like, some of them are quite happy to see you not pay the loan back and for them to get that property.
That's right.
Okay, gentlemen. Well, we will see if this becomes a topic in the future that comes up. Maybe it will, because I tend to think that Zach's right, that there's a lot more of operators that got overly aggressive here and maybe popping up with some issues, and some mez operators that may be getting their hands on some good properties in the future.